Okay, as you can see, my NS7 dashboard as of right now is working. My initial problem was the right hand side screen was black with some text across the top about an error with the firmware. And the problem I'd experienced whenever I tried to update the firmware, the device is up to date, an update is not needed. And it won't allow me to reinstall the firmware on my dashboard. So, it's been about a month now since I fixed it, so I don't remember exactly what code I changed. I'd have to go back through again. But I modified the firmware updater so it would think that, well, as you can see, it has the same version number, but it allows me to update the firmware. So now, when I click that, it'll begin to do the firmware update on all the screens, but then it does crash. But the advantage is that since it did that, my dashboard is now sitting in firmware update mode. So now I can go back and rerun the original firmware updater here. And now, as you can see, it doesn't have the original firmware, and it will allow me to actually update the firmware. And that'll take about 10 minutes and 14 seconds, so you probably don't have to sit here and watch all that because it's just going to sit there and do its thing. But this is how I fixed my Catalina error with macOS, wiping out my dashboard. And I've since upgraded to the new Catalina driver, and things have been working okay for about the past month. But yeah, so you said you wanted the video, and I'm not very good at filming, but I just have my phone here, but it's going. So if you happen to have the problem when trying to update your firmware and it says you already have the latest version of firmware, this will work. So hit me up and I'll try to find a way to get you this hacked firmware updater. This particular firmware updater is the actual original one you can download right from the Numark website. The hack is what wipes the old firmware, or not the old firmware, but the current firmware off of the dashboard.